The moment Vanessa announced my Christmas dishes would be fed to the dogs, I smiled sweetly and declared to her shocked guests, "Well, since we're being honest tonight, let me share what Vanessa really thinks about each one of you." 23 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to horror. Vanessa's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the panic flooding her eyes as she realized her carefully constructed social facade was about to crumble. How did I get here? 3 days ago, I was Eleanor Wright, devoted mother-in-law, spending every waking moment preparing what I thought would be the perfect Christmas feast for my daughter-in-law's annual holiday party. 16 hours of cooking hand-rolled pasta, prime rib that cost me $300 desserts that required ingredients I had to special order, all because Vanessa had sweetly asked if I could contribute something small to her gathering. I should have known better. After 3 years of watching Vanessa manipulate every situation to her advantage, I should have seen this coming. But grief makes you stupid, and loneliness makes you desperate. Since Thomas died, I'd been so grateful for any inclusion in my son Ryan's life that I ignored every red flag Vanessa raised. Thomas had been my anchor for 42 years. He knew exactly who I was, not just a wife or mother, but Eleanor, the woman who'd once organized a sit-in at the hospital where she worked when they tried to cut corners on patient care. The woman who laughed so loudly at outdoor concerts that strangers would turn and smile. The woman who never needed to be small to be loved. But his heart gave out one ordinary Tuesday, and suddenly, the house we'd filled with memories fell silent. My son Ryan tried to visit when he could, but he had his own life, his own family. And at the center of that family was Vanessa Jackson Wright, with her perfect smile and calculated kindness. "Mom," Ryan would say, "Vanessa really wants you to feel included," and I'd believe him because I needed to. I needed to believe I still had family who wanted me. The first year after Thomas died, Vanessa would call to check in. "Eleanor, we're so worried about you all alone in that big house. Why don't you come over for dinner?" I'd arrive with homemade bread or a bottle of wine, and she'd take it with that practiced smile. "Oh, you shouldn't have. But how sweet." Then the pattern emerged. The invitations always came with expectations. "Since you're coming for Thanksgiving, would you mind bringing the turkey and stuffing? Oh, and pies, too? The children love your pies." What started as bringing a side dish became cooking entire meals, which I did willingly. It was the price of admission to my son's life. By year 2, Vanessa had moved beyond food. "Eleanor, since you're so good with numbers, would you mind looking over our taxes? Ryan is just swamped at work." Or, "Eleanor, the kids would love to stay with you this weekend while Ryan and I go to the Hamptons." I said yes, always yes, because saying no might mean not seeing my grandchildren, not being part of family photos, not having anyone remember I existed. The kitchen renovation was when I should have seen it clearly. "Mom," Ryan called one evening, "we're finally redoing the kitchen, but we're a bit short. Vanessa really wants marble countertops, and you know how happy it would make her." I wrote the check $12,000 from the money Thomas and I had saved for traveling in our retirement, dreams we would never fulfill together now. "Consider it an early inheritance," I said, trying to sound generous rather than desperate. Vanessa sent a text with a heart emoji. No call, no real thank you, just a digital acknowledgement that I had once again proven useful. The party was already in full swing when I arrived at 7, struggling through their front door with 3 heavy casserole dishes and 2 dessert carriers. The kitchen, my kitchen, in a way gleamed with the marble I'd paid for. No one offered to help with the heavy dishes. Vanessa was holding court near the fireplace, stunning in a red silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She glanced over as I set my contributions on the dining room table, her expression shifting from annoyance to something I couldn't quite identify. "Oh, good," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ryan's mom brought food, too. We'll have plenty to feed the old woman's dishes to the dogs after everyone's eaten the real dinner." The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Not my food, not Eleanor's cooking, but the old woman's dishes. As if I was some stranger who'd wandered in off the street instead of the woman who'd helped pay for their kitchen renovation. The guests laughed nervously, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge their hostess. That wasn't the first time Vanessa had humiliated me, just the most public, for 3 years. I'd watched her perfect the art of subtle degradation. There were the family photos where I was positioned at the far edge, easy to crop out later. The conversations that stopped when I entered a room. The way she would translate things I said to others, as if my age made me incapable of clear speech. "What Eleanor is trying to say," she would interject, cutting me off mid-sentence, "is that she's a bit tired and should probably head home soon." I wasn't tired. I was enjoying a conversation with Ryan's colleague about a book we'd both read. But suddenly I was the elderly burden who couldn't manage her own stamina. Then there were the financial expectations. Beyond the kitchen renovation, there were loans that were never repaid. When Ryan and Vanessa bought a new SUV, she made sure to tell me they'd considered a less expensive model, out of consideration for your limited budget. Eleanor. This while wearing diamond earrings I knew cost thousands. I wasn't poor. Thomas had left me comfortable, if not wealthy, but Vanessa treated every dollar I spent on myself as selfish, while every dollar I gave them was simply my obligation. "The children need to see their grandmother being generous," she once said when I hesitated about funding a lavish birthday party. "Don't you want them to remember you fondly?" The memory manipulation was perhaps the most insidious. "Eleanor, you agreed to watch the children this weekend. We already booked the hotel," she would insist, though I had no recollection of such a conversation. "Your memory isn't what it used to be," she'd add with performative concern. Ryan rarely witnessed these moments. When he was present, Vanessa was all warmth and consideration. "Eleanor, let me get that for you." Or, "Eleanor has such interesting perspectives on things, don't you think, dear?" Sometimes I wondered if I was imagining things. Maybe grief had made me oversensitive. Maybe I was jealous of the woman who now held central place in my son's life. I would lie awake at night, replaying conversations, wondering if I'd misinterpreted innocent comments as calculated slights. But then there were moments of such clear malice that no amount of self-doubt could explain them away. Last Mother's Day, Ryan sent me flowers with a card that read, "To the woman who taught me what strength looks like. Love always. Ryan." When I called to thank him, Vanessa answered. "Oh, those," she said with a laugh. "I actually picked those out." Ryan was going to send a simple bouquet, but I told him his mother deserves better. I chose the card message too, you know how men are with expressing feelings. She stole even that small, genuine connection with my son, rewrote it so she was the thoughtful one, the considerate one. Ryan was in the background, calling out, "Tell Mom I love her," and Vanessa, holding the phone, controlling the narrative. I recognized Vanessa's friends at the Christmas party, the regular cast in her social production. Jessica Moore, the real estate agent who always talked about her latest big sale. Michael Carter, Vanessa's tennis partner, who drank too much but covered it with expensive cologne and loud jokes. Karen and Steve Thompson, who hosted the neighborhood's most lavish parties in their perfectly decorated home. Robert and Linda Davis, the older couple who lived down the street and who Vanessa only invited because Linda's brother was on the board of the country club Vanessa desperately wanted to join. They were all players in Vanessa's careful social choreography, and none of them really knew me beyond Ryan's mother or the old lady who brings the food. I was a prop, not a person. The night of the party, I had awakened at 4 a.m. to start cooking. The prime rib needed to roast slowly. The pasta had to be rolled fresh. The tiramisu needed time to set properly. My hands ached from chopping and stirring, but I was determined that everything would be perfect. Not for Vanessa, for Ryan, for the grandchildren who loved my cooking, for my own pride. Perhaps, to remind myself I still had value beyond writing checks. I wore my best dress, a deep green velvet that Thomas always said brought out the flecks of gold in my eyes. I applied makeup carefully, covering the dark circles from too little sleep. I even put on the pearl earrings Thomas had given me on our 35th anniversary. "Still the most beautiful woman in any room," he'd said when he gave them to me. The party was already noisy when I arrived, Christmas music competing with laughter and conversation. The foyer was decorated with garlands and twinkling lights, a massive tree dominating the living room corner. Everything perfect, everything expensive. Vanessa's taste was impeccable, if cold like a department store display rather than a home. I maneuvered through the crowd, no one offering to help with my heavy dishes. Finally reaching the dining room, I set everything down with relief. The table was already laden with catered appetizers, each one artfully arranged on silver trays. My homemade dishes, though carefully prepared, looked out of place among the professional presentation. I glanced at the handwritten place cards, scanning for my name. It wasn't there. I checked again, thinking perhaps I'd missed it. Nothing. Looking for something. Vanessa's voice came from behind me, that practiced tone of solicitous concern that never reached her eyes. "My seat," I said simply. "I don't see a place card." "Oh," she smiled, all warmth for anyone who might be watching. "I figured you'd want to eat early and head home before it gets too late. There's a small table in the breakfast nook for you." The breakfast nook separated from the main dining room, out of sight of most guests. I would eat alone while everyone else enjoyed the community of the table. "I'd rather join the main table," I said, working to keep my voice steady. Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes, annoyance at having her plans questioned. "The seating is already arranged. Eleanor?" We wouldn't want to disrupt everyone else's evening, would we? That's when I noticed Ryan approaching, champagne flutes in hand. Vanessa's expression instantly transformed, softening into affection. "Mom." "You made it," Ryan said, leaning to kiss my cheek. "Everything smells amazing." "I was just telling Eleanor about the special table I set up for her," Vanessa said smoothly. "So she can be comfortable without all the noise." Ryan looked between us, momentarily uncertain. I could see him processing, deciding whether to question this arrangement. The moment stretched, and I watched my son choose the path of least resistance. "That was thoughtful of you, honey," he said to Vanessa, then turned to me. "Mom, you'll be more comfortable there. I'm sure. These parties get pretty rowdy." "I'm 65, not 95, I wanted to say. Instead, I nodded, unwilling to create a scene. This was the patterned small humiliations that would seem petty if I objected to them. Death by 1,000 cuts. As guests began to gather near the dining room, admiring the spread, Vanessa moved to the center of the room, tapping her glass for attention. She was radiant in that red dress, all eyes on her as she welcomed everyone to her little holiday gathering, 40 people in a home decorated like a magazine spread. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to thank all of you for coming. Family and true friends are what make this season special." Her emphasis on true friends was subtle but clear to me. I was neither family nor friend in her eyes. "We have a wonderful meal prepared by Bergman's Catering," she continued, gesturing to the elegant displays. Then her eyes found me at the edge of the crowd. "And Ryan's mother has also brought some dishes." A brief pause, then the line that broke something inside me. "We'll have plenty to feed the old woman's dishes to the dogs after everyone's eaten the real dinner." Laughter rippled through the room, nervous and uncertain. A few guests glanced my way with embarrassment or pity. I saw Jessica cover her smile with her hand. Michael took a large gulp of his drink. Karen looked away, pretending to adjust her necklace. Ryan was across the room, talking to someone else, not hearing the comment that reduced his mother's 16 hours of labor to dog food. That's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way Vanessa smirked as she said it, so confident in her power over me. Maybe it was remembering how I'd stood over that stove until my feet ached, wanting so desperately to be valued by this woman who'd never shown me an ounce of genuine respect. Or maybe it was the 3 years of swallowed insults finally demanding their due. I set down my purse, straightened my shoulders, and looked directly at Vanessa's best friend, Jessica, the real estate agent who'd spent the last hour bragging about her latest sale. "Jessica," I said, my voice carrying across the sudden hush, "Vanessa told me just last week that you're drowning in debt from that new house, and that your husband's about to leave you because you're more interested in impressing strangers than taking care of your family." Jessica's wine glass hit the floor with a satisfying crash. The room fell dead silent except for the Christmas music still playing softly in the background. Vanessa's face had gone from red to white to green in the span of 5 seconds. "Eleanor, stop," she whispered. But I was just getting started. I turned to Michael, Vanessa's tennis partner, who was staring at me with his mouth open. "And Michael," Vanessa says you have a drinking problem and that your wife only stays with you because she's afraid you'll hurt yourself if she leaves. She also mentioned that you smell like bourbon before noon and that everyone at the club talks about it. Michael's confident smile evaporated. He looked around the room as if seeking escape, but every eye was fixed on him now. His wife Sarah grabbed his arm protectively, confirming what I just revealed. "Mom, please." Ryan's voice came from behind me, but I couldn't stop now. 3 years of being the convenient target for Vanessa's cruelty had built up like pressure in a steam engine. I moved to Karen and Steve, the couple Vanessa always invited because they threw the best parties in the neighborhood. "Karen, Vanessa thinks your marriage is a joke. She told me you only stay together for appearances and that Steve's been having an affair with his secretary for 2 years. She said everyone knows except you." Karen's perfectly composed expression cracked. "What and Steve?" I continued, feeling almost lightheaded with the power of speaking truth. "Vanessa says you lost most of your retirement money on bad investments, and that's why Karen had to go back to work. She thinks it's hilarious that you pretend to be successful when you're both drowning financially." The party was disintegrating before my eyes. Couples were whispering urgently to each other, some heading for the door, others demanding explanations. Vanessa stood frozen in the center of it all, watching her carefully curated social circle implode. But I wasn't finished. Robert and Linda, the older couple from down the street, were backing toward the exit when I addressed them directly. "Vanessa calls you two the ancient, boring couple and says you only get invited to things out of pity. She told me last month that watching you eat makes her physically ill and that she hopes you move to a retirement community soon." Linda's eyes filled with tears. They'd been neighbors for 8 years, always ready to help with yard work or to accept packages when no one was home. Now they knew exactly what their kindness had earned them. "That's enough." Ryan finally found his voice, moving between me and his wife. "Mom, what's gotten into you?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be kind and honest, and saw him preparing to defend the woman who had just publicly humiliated his mother. "What's gotten into me is 3 years of watching your wife treat me like garbage while you pretend not to notice." Vanessa finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak than her usual confident tone. "Those are private conversations taken completely out of context." "Are they?" I asked sweetly, because I remember them quite clearly. Word for word, actually. The remaining guests were gathering their coats with the desperate efficiency of people fleeing a natural disaster. Vanessa's carefully planned Christmas party, the social event she'd been organizing for months, was collapsing faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Ryan looked between his wife and his mother with the expression of a man watching his life explode in real time. "Vanessa, is this true? Do you really say these things about our friends?" "Ryan, you can't seriously believe," Vanessa started. But Dr. Peterson, their family dentist, interrupted her. "Actually, I've heard her say similar things," he admitted quietly. "At the Hendersons' barbecue last summer, I thought it was just harmless gossip. But now—" He shook his head and headed for the door with his wife. One by one, Vanessa's friends were either leaving or confirming my revelations. The beautiful Christmas decorations that had taken her weeks to perfect now looked garish and overdone in the empty spaces left by fleeing guests. "How could you know all of this?" Vanessa demanded, her voice rising to a near shriek. "How could you possibly remember every conversation?" I smiled at her, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Oh, honey, that's the thing about being dismissed as a useless old woman. People forget I'm even in the room. You've been saying these things right in front of me for 3 years, always assuming I was too stupid or too grateful to pay attention." The truth was even more satisfying than I'd hoped. I pulled out my phone and held it up so she could see the screen. "And I've been recording our conversations for the past 6 months. Amazing what you learn when you start paying attention to how someone really talks about the people in their life." Ryan stared at the phone in my hand as if it was a weapon. "You've been recording us, not us, sweetheart. Her, every coffee date, every shopping trip, every time she called to complain about your friends, your neighbors, even your coworkers. I have dozens of hours of Vanessa explaining exactly what she thinks about everyone in your social circle." Vanessa lunged for my phone, but I was ready for her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. This is just one copy." I've got backups in several very safe places. The few remaining guests were openly gawking now, phones appearing as people started recording this meltdown for their own social media channels. Vanessa's reputation as the perfect hostess was being destroyed in real time, and everyone wanted evidence. "Get out," Vanessa whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "Get out of my house right now." "Gladly," I said, collecting my purse. "But Vanessa, the next time you want to serve my food to your dogs, you might want to make sure you know exactly who you're dealing with." I walked out of that house, feeling like I could fly. Behind me, I could hear Vanessa screaming at Ryan, demanding he choose between his wife and his mother, for the first time in 3 years. I wasn't worried about his answer. My phone started ringing before I'd even made it to my car. Text messages poured in from numbers I barely recognized. Apparently, several people at the party had shared videos of Vanessa's meltdown on social media, and the story was spreading faster than I could have imagined. The night air was cold against my flushed cheeks as I fumbled with my keys, hands trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and disbelief at what I'd just done. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to cry. The rational voice in my head wondered if I'd just destroyed my relationship with my son forever. I sat in my car for several minutes, letting the engine idle, watching the windows of the house where lights still blazed but where the festive atmosphere had been replaced by something altogether different. Through the gaps in the curtains, I could see silhouettes of the few remaining guests, some gesturing animatedly. I imagined Vanessa trying to salvage what remained of her reputation. The first call that came through was from Jessica, the real estate agent whose marriage I'd exposed. I hesitated before answering, expecting fury. Instead, her voice was filled with something I hadn't expected: gratitude. "Eleanor, I need to thank you," she said, barely holding back tears. "You just saved my life." "I don't understand," I replied, still parked in front of Ryan and Vanessa's house. I had no idea people knew about our problems, and I certainly didn't know my own friends were gossiping about my marriage falling apart. "Jessica, I'm sorry if I hurt you, but No, you don't understand. Mark and I talked for 4 hours last night. Really talked for the first time in months. We're going to counseling, and we're going to figure this out. But if I'd kept pretending everything was fine while people like Vanessa were laughing behind my back..." She trailed off. But I understood. Sometimes the most painful truth is better than the most comforting lie. I thought of all the times I'd pretended not to notice Vanessa's cruelty, because acknowledging it would have forced me to respond. Jessica wasn't the only one. Over the next 2 days, I received similar calls from Michael, who was checking himself into rehab, and Karen, who was finally confronting her husband about his affair. Even Robert and Linda called to say they were glad to finally know where they stood with their neighbors. "We always felt like outsiders at those gatherings," Linda admitted, "but we thought it was just our age. Now we know, and honestly, Eleanor, it's freeing not to have to try so hard with people who were never going to value us anyway." Not everyone was grateful. Of course. David showed up at my apartment on the 3rd day, his face drawn with exhaustion. I let him in without a word, noticing how he automatically sat at my kitchen table the way he had as a child when he was upset. "Mom, you destroyed Vanessa's entire social circle," he said without preamble. "She's barely speaking to me, and the kids are asking why Grandma made Mommy cry." I poured him coffee from the pot I'd just made, taking my time. The kitchen in my small apartment was nothing like the grand marble showcase I'd helped pay for in their house, but it was mine. Every corner reflected me the hand-painted mugs Thomas and I had collected on our travels, the herbs growing in pots on the windowsill, the refrigerator covered with my grandchildren's artwork. "I didn't destroy anything," I finally said, setting his mug down carefully. "I just revealed what was already broken." Ryan stared into the steam rising from his coffee. "But why now?" "Why did you have to humiliate her in front of everyone?" I took a deep breath, considering my words carefully. "For 3 years, I've been trying to earn a place in your family by being useful, cooking, cleaning, babysitting, lending money. And every single time, Vanessa made it clear that I was a burden she tolerated for your sake." Ryan winced. He knew it was true. That night, when she called my food dog food in front of a room full of people, something broke in me, I realized I'd spent 3 years accepting disrespect because I was afraid of losing you and the kids. But you know what? If respecting myself means losing people who don't value me anyway, maybe that's not really a loss. My son sat quietly for several minutes, staring into his coffee cup. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. She did say those things. Mom, all of them. I heard some of the recordings when she was trying to prove you'd edited them somehow. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father it made my heart ache. I had no idea she felt that way about our friends, about our life, and about me, I said gently. The worst part, Ryan continued, his voice barely above a whisper, is that I let her treat you that way. I saw it happening and told myself it wasn't that bad, that you didn't mind, that it was just her personality. I reached across the table and took his hand. Sweetheart, you can't control what Vanessa does, but you can control how you respond to it. She wants me to cut contact with you completely. She says this was an unforgivable betrayal and that she'll never feel safe around you again. The words hurt, but they didn't surprise me. Vanessa had always been an all-or-nothing person when it came to control. And what do you want to do? I asked, bracing myself for his answer. Ryan was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to respond. Finally, he said, I want my kids to know their grandmother. I want them to learn how to cook from you the way I did. I want them to understand that family doesn't get to treat each other like garbage just because they think they can get away with it. Relief flooded through me, though I was careful not to show it too openly. That's going to be hard on your marriage. Maybe. But you know what I realized listening to those recordings? Vanessa doesn't just talk about our friends that way. She talks about everyone that way, including me. That surprised me. I'd always thought Vanessa genuinely loved Ryan, even if she treated everyone else poorly. When she thought I wasn't paying attention, she spent 20 minutes telling her sister how I'm getting soft around the middle and how she could have done so much better. That I was just a safe choice, because my family had money and connections she needed. I'm sorry, honey. Don't be. I needed to hear it. I've been so focused on keeping peace that I never noticed I was living with someone who doesn't actually respect me either. We talked for another hour about his marriage, the children, and what came next. When he left, he hugged me tighter than he had since he was 12 years old. Mom, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, he said at the door. It took courage to do what you did. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about courage. Was it courageous to finally speak up after years of abuse, or was I just an old woman who'd finally reached her breaking point? My phone buzzed with another message, this one from an unknown number. Mrs. Wright, this is Linda Morrison from Channel 7 News. We'd love to do a story about your Christmas party confrontation. Several viewers have sent us the videos, and we think it represents something important about family dynamics and standing up to bullies. A news story about me. 6 months ago, the thought would have horrified me. Now, it felt like an opportunity. I called the number back and agreed to an interview for the following week. If Vanessa wanted to paint me as the villain in this story, she was welcome to try. But I had recordings, witnesses, and 3 years of documentation about her behavior. Most importantly, I had something I'd lost somewhere in the fog of grief and loneliness, my voice. 2 days after Ryan's visit, I received a call that would change everything I thought I knew about my situation. Mrs. Wright, this is Richard Wells, your late husband's attorney. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I frowned, puzzled. Mr. Wells, I haven't heard from you since we settled Thomas's estate 3 years ago. I know, and I apologize for that. Thomas left certain documents in my care with specific instructions about when they should be delivered to you. My heart quickened. What kind of documents? Estate documents that were separate from his will. He was very specific that you should only receive them if certain conditions were met. There was a pause, and I could hear papers rustling. Based on what I've seen in the news lately, I believe those conditions have been satisfied. Thomas left additional estate documents. I sank onto the couch, gripping the phone tighter. That doesn't make sense. We went through everything after his death. Or so you thought, Richard said carefully. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning? This isn't something we should discuss over the phone. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with possibilities. What had Thomas known that he hadn't shared with me? What conditions had my Christmas party confrontation satisfied? Richard's office was exactly as I remembered it from 3 years ago. All dark wood and legal books, but the documents he spread across his desk were completely unfamiliar. Thomas came to see me about 6 months before he died, Richard explained, his fingers smoothing the edge of a thick folder. He was concerned about how Vanessa treated you and worried that after his death, the situation would get worse. He wanted to make sure you had options if things became unbearable. I stared at the papers, trying to process what I was seeing. Trust documents, property deeds, investment accounts I'd never heard of. Thomas had been quietly moving assets for several years, creating a separate trust that Vanessa and Ryan knew nothing about. He left instructions that these documents should only be given to you if you demonstrated the courage to stand up for yourself against family abuse. The numbers on the pages made little sense at first. According to these documents, Thomas had left me not just the modest life insurance policy I'd been living on, but assets worth nearly $800,000. $800,000, I whispered, my fingers tracing the figures as if they might change under my touch. How is this possible? Why wouldn't he tell me? Richard leaned back in his chair. Thomas was concerned that if you knew about these assets, Vanessa would find a way to access them. He wanted to ensure they would be available to you when you needed them most, when you were ready to break free from her manipulation. But how did he know? I asked, still struggling to comprehend. How did he know what would happen after he was gone? He was monitoring Vanessa's behavior toward you for years. Eleanor. He documented incidents, saved voicemails, even recorded some conversations. He was building a case to protect you. But he died before he could put his plan into action. My hands were shaking as I flipped through page after page of evidence. Thomas had known. He'd seen what I was too lonely and grief-stricken to acknowledge that Vanessa was systematically isolating and demeaning me. The trust documents include a very specific clause, Richard continued. If Ryan chooses to maintain a relationship with you despite Vanessa's demands that he cut contact, the trust remains in your control. But if he allows his wife to completely cut you out of their lives, the trust dissolves and the money goes to charity. I let out a short laugh, though there was little humor in it. Thomas was testing Ryan. He was protecting you both, Richard corrected gently. He knew that Vanessa's true nature would eventually be revealed, and he wanted to make sure Ryan had the strength to choose family over convenience when that moment came. I thought about my son's visit 3 days ago. His decision to stand by me despite his wife's ultimatum. Thomas would have been proud, but there was more. At the bottom of the stack was a document that made my breath catch. A detailed plan for what Thomas called Operation Truth, complete with instructions for documenting Vanessa's behavior and strategies for exposing it when the time was right. My late husband had essentially written the playbook for everything I'd done at that Christmas party, I said incredulously. Right down to the importance of having recordings as evidence, Richard nodded. Thomas was very thorough. He knew that Vanessa's social standing was her primary concern, and that public exposure would be the most effective way to challenge her power. I wasn't just a grieving widow who'd finally snapped. I was carrying out a plan Thomas had designed to save both me and our son from a woman he'd recognized as dangerous long before I was ready to see it. There's something else you should know, Richard said, pulling out another file. Thomas hired a private investigator to look into Vanessa's background before her marriage to Ryan. He was concerned about some inconsistencies in her stories about her past. What did he find? I asked, not sure I wanted to hear the answer. Enough to be concerned. Vanessa was married before Ryan, a fact she concealed from him. She was also involved in a case in Colorado where she convinced an elderly man to change his will in her favor shortly before his death. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. She's done this before. The Colorado case was dropped when the man's family couldn't prove manipulation, but the pattern was clear. Thomas found evidence of at least 2 other elderly people she'd manipulated into giving her money or property. I felt sick, thinking of how easily I'd fallen into her trap, how willingly I'd handed over money, time, and emotional energy, always hoping for scraps of appreciation that never came. "The question now," Richard said, closing the file, "is what you want to do with this unexpected inheritance and the power it represents." I thought about it for a long moment. I need time to process all of this. But one thing is clear: Thomas wanted me to be free of Vanessa's control, and I intend to honor that wish. As I drove home, my mind was whirling with possibilities. Thomas had seen what I couldn't, had prepared for a future he wouldn't share, all to ensure I wouldn't be left defenseless. The love in that gesture was overwhelming. For the first time since his death, I felt Thomas's presence not as a painful absence, but as a guiding hand. He'd known I would eventually find the strength to stand up for myself. He'd believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. The question now was what to do with this unexpected gift, not just the money, but the truth about Vanessa and the power it represented. The next morning, I returned to Richard's office with a clearer head and a list of questions. He welcomed me with a grim smile, as if he'd been expecting my return. "I need to understand exactly what Thomas discovered about Vanessa," I said without preamble. "Everything he knew, everything he suspected." Richard nodded and pulled out a thick folder labeled Operation Truth in Thomas's distinctive handwriting. "This contains all of his notes and the private investigator's findings. It's extensive. For the next 3 hours, I immersed myself in my late husband's investigation. Thomas had been meticulous, documenting every slight, every manipulative comment, every financial request Vanessa had made. But more disturbing were the patterns he'd identified from her past. Before she met Ryan, Vanessa had systematically worked her way into the lives of wealthy older individuals, I summarized, looking up from a particularly disturbing report. She created dependencies, isolated them from family, then extracted financial support. "That's correct," Richard confirmed. Thomas believed she saw Ryan as her long-term security, a young, successful man with family money and a trusting nature. "But you were an obstacle. You knew Ryan too well, could potentially see through her manipulation." I flipped through more pages, finding emails between Vanessa and her sister discussing how to manage me after Thomas's death. They'd planned to gradually isolate me from the family while extracting as much financial support as possible. There were even discussions about having me declared incompetent so they could access my bank accounts. "She was planning to have me committed," I said, the words tasting bitter. "Eventually," Richard agreed. "Once she'd gotten everything she could from you financially and you became too much trouble to manage." I sat in stunned silence, processing the betrayal. Vanessa hadn't just been cruel to her mother-in-law. She'd been systematically plotting to destroy me while pretending to care about family unity. Why didn't Thomas confront her directly, or at least warn Ryan? I finally asked. Richard's expression softened. He tried, in his way. He had several conversations with Ryan about Vanessa's behavior, but Ryan always defended her. And then Thomas got his diagnosis. I felt a chill run through me. "He didn't want you to know," Richard said gently. "The heart condition was real, but there was more. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He knew he had limited time, and he decided to use it preparing for your future rather than fighting battles he couldn't win." The revelation stunned me. Thomas had kept his terminal diagnosis secret, suffering alone so I wouldn't have to bear that burden along with grief for his heart condition. "He created Operation Truth during his last months," Richard continued. "He knew he wouldn't be here to protect you from Vanessa, so he built you a safety net instead. The trust, the evidence. All of it was designed to give you the resources you would need when the time came to break free." At the bottom of the folder was a sealed envelope with my name written in Thomas's handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. "If you're reading this, then you've finally seen Vanessa for who she truly is, and more importantly, you've found the courage to stand against her. I always knew that courage was in you. It's one of the countless reasons I've loved you for over 40 years. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading his final message to me. "I'm sorry I couldn't fight this battle with you. I'm sorry I had to leave you to face her alone. But Eleanor, you were never the fragile creature Vanessa believed you to be. You are the woman who organized hospital sit-ins, who raised a son with compassion and integrity, who made me laugh until my sides hurt for 4 decades. I could almost hear his voice, warm and sure, as I read. The money in the trust is yours to use however you see fit, but my hope is that you'll use it to reclaim your life and help Ryan see the truth before Vanessa does to him what she's tried to do to you. Be strategic, be patient, and remember that you were never the supporting character in someone else's story. You are, and always have been, the heroine of your own. The letter was signed simply, "All my love, always, Thomas." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "What happens now?" I asked Richard. "That's entirely up to you. The trust is active. The money is accessible. Thomas left a detailed strategy for confronting Vanessa if you choose to pursue it, but the decision is yours." I thought about it for a long moment. I need copies of everything, all the evidence, all the reports, and I need time to decide the next step. Richard nodded and began preparing the documents for me to take home. As he worked, I stared out his office window at the city below, feeling a strange mix of grief and determination. Thomas had given me one final gift, the truth, and the means to use it. Now I had to decide how to honor that gift in a way that would protect not just me, but Ryan and my grandchildren as well. The question now was what Vanessa would do when she realized her control was slipping. If Thomas's investigation was correct, she wouldn't surrender her position without a fight. I was about to find out just how far she would go to maintain her carefully constructed facade. 2 days after meeting with Richard, I was sitting in my living room planning how to use Thomas's unexpected gift when Vanessa decided to declare war. The first shot came in the form of a certified letter delivered by a very nervous-looking postal worker. "Mrs. Wright," he asked, checking his clipboard twice. "I need you to sign for this." The envelope was thick, expensive stationery with a law firm's letterhead. Inside was a cease and desist order demanding I stop spreading malicious lies about Vanessa Jackson Wright and threatening legal action if I continued my campaign of harassment and defamation. I had to laugh. After 3 years of Vanessa's psychological warfare, she was now claiming to be the victim because I'd finally fought back. The timing was particularly amusing since I hadn't spoken publicly about her since the TV interview 2 days earlier. My phone rang an hour later. Ryan's voice was strained, exhausted. "Mom, please tell me you're not planning to escalate this situation." "What situation would that be?" "Sweetheart," I asked, though I knew perfectly well. "Vanessa hired a lawyer. She's talking about suing you for damages to her reputation and emotional distress. She claims you've been systematically trying to destroy her life for months." I looked at the legal documents spread across my coffee table, Thomas's carefully organized evidence of Vanessa's behavior, and smiled. "Well, that's interesting because I've been doing some legal consulting of my own." "What does that mean?" Ryan sounded worried now. "It means your wife picked a fight with someone who's much better prepared for battle than she realizes." The next morning, I called Richard Wells and asked him to recommend a litigation attorney who specialized in harassment cases. Within hours, I was sitting across from Patricia Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd built a reputation destroying bullies in court. "Mrs. Wright," she said after reviewing Vanessa's letter and Thomas's documentation, "your daughter-in-law has made a significant tactical error." "How so?" I asked, pouring tea from the thermos I'd brought. Old habits die hard. I still prepared for meetings, as Thomas had taught me, with notes and refreshments. "By claiming you've been harassing her, she's opened the door for us to present evidence of her actual harassment of you." We spent 3 hours going through Thomas's files. He'd been thorough, documenting not just Vanessa's treatment of me, but her behavior toward others. Credit card statements showing suspicious purchases, social media posts she'd deleted where she mocked family members, even recordings of phone calls where she'd threatened to keep the grandchildren away from me if I didn't comply with her demands. "This woman is calculating," Patricia said flatly, "and now she's given us legal grounds to expose her publicly." By Thursday, Vanessa had received our countersuit harassment, elder abuse, alienation of affection, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We were seeking damages, a restraining order, and most importantly, court-mandated family counseling that would require Vanessa to confront her behavior under professional supervision. Ryan called that evening, his voice shaking with something between anger and desperation. "Mom, what are you doing? Vanessa's talking about leaving, taking the kids, and moving back to her mother's in California. Ryan, I have something to tell you about your father's estate. It's going to change how you see this entire situation. I drove to Ryan's office the next morning with a briefcase full of documents that would reshape his understanding of everything that had happened since Thomas's death. My son looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. His usually neat appearance was disheveled and tired. "Mom, before you say anything, I need you to know that Vanessa's threatening to take the kids and disappear if this lawsuit continues. She says she has relatives in Canada who would help her stay hidden." I set the briefcase on his desk and opened it slowly. "Ryan, your father spent the last year of his life protecting us from exactly this situation. He knew Vanessa would eventually show her true nature, and he prepared for it. For the next hour, I walked my son through Thomas's documentation, the financial abuse, the manipulation tactics, the systematic isolation of family members who didn't serve Vanessa's purposes. Ryan's face grew paler with each revelation. "Dad knew all this. Why didn't he say something? Because he knew you wouldn't have believed it until you were ready to see it yourself. Thomas understood that Vanessa's control over you was psychological, and that breaking it would require you to witness her behavior firsthand." The most damaging evidence was a series of emails between Vanessa and her sister discussing how to manage me after Thomas's death. They'd planned to gradually isolate me from the family while extracting as much financial support as possible. There were even discussions about having me declared incompetent so they could access my bank accounts. "She was planning to have you committed?" Ryan asked, his voice hollow. "Eventually, once she'd gotten everything she could from me financially, and I became too much trouble to manage." Ryan sat in stunned silence, processing the betrayal. His wife hadn't just been cruel to his mother. She'd been systematically plotting to destroy me while pretending to care about family unity. "There's more," I said gently. "Your father hired a private investigator to look into Vanessa's background before your marriage. He was concerned about some inconsistencies in her stories about her past." The investigator's report painted a picture of a woman who'd left a trail of damaged relationships across 3 states. Vanessa had been married before Ryan, a fact she'd hidden from him. She'd also been involved in an elder abuse case in Colorado, where she'd convinced an elderly man to change his will in her favor shortly before his death. "She's done this before." Ryan's voice was barely audible. "Multiple times. Thomas found evidence of at least 2 elderly people she'd manipulated into giving her money or property. The Colorado case was dropped when the man's family couldn't prove manipulation, but the pattern was clear." My son looked like he was going to be sick. "The kids. Mom, I can't let her take the kids." "She won't, because now we have leverage she doesn't know about, and we're going to use it to ensure she never has the power to threaten this family again." Patricia had already filed an emergency motion to prevent Vanessa from leaving the state with the children, citing the evidence of her pattern of manipulation and the ongoing legal proceedings. But that was just the beginning. "Ryan, your father left you something else. A trust fund for the children's education and future that Vanessa can't touch, but it comes with conditions designed to protect them from exactly this kind of situation." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering that left Vanessa scrambling to maintain control of a narrative that was slipping away from her. Patricia had been ruthless in her filings, presenting evidence of Vanessa's manipulation tactics in language that made it impossible for any judge to ignore. Vanessa's response was predictably dramatic. She called a family meeting, demanding that Ryan's siblings choose sides in what she characterized as an attack on their family by a bitter old woman who couldn't accept that her son had moved on with his life. I wasn't invited to this meeting, but Ryan called me afterward with a report that was both satisfying and sad. "Mom, she tried to get Jennifer and Michael to sign a statement saying you've always been difficult and that this lawsuit is frivolous. She wanted them to testify that you've been jealous of our marriage from the beginning." Jennifer and Michael were Ryan's siblings, both of whom had remained carefully neutral during my 3 years of conflict with Vanessa. They had their own families to worry about and had always taken the path of least resistance when it came to family drama. And what did they say? Jennifer asked to see some of the evidence, when Vanessa couldn't produce anything to support her claims, and Jennifer saw some of Dad's documentation. She refused to sign. Michael did the same. More importantly, Jennifer had revealed something that cast Vanessa's behavior in an even darker light. She told me that Vanessa had approached her last year about having you declared incompetent. She wanted Jennifer to support a claim that you were showing signs of dementia and couldn't be trusted to manage your own affairs. The manipulation had been even more extensive than we'd realized. Vanessa hadn't just been planning to isolate me socially. She'd been laying groundwork to have me declared mentally unfit so she could control my finances and medical decisions. "There's something else," Ryan continued. "Jennifer said Vanessa has been telling people for months that you've been acting erratically, forgetting conversations, repeating yourself. She's been building a case for incompetency for almost a year." The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. While I'd been grieving my husband and desperately trying to maintain a relationship with my family, Vanessa had been systematically destroying my reputation and credibility in preparation for a legal assault on my independence. But Vanessa had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated both Thomas's foresight and my willingness to fight back when cornered. That evening, Patricia called with news that changed everything. "Eleanor, Vanessa's first attorney has withdrawn from the case." Apparently, when he realized the extent of the evidence against her and the pattern of behavior we've documented, he decided he didn't want to represent her. What does that mean? It means she's scrambling to find new representation, and any competent attorney who reviews this case is going to advise her to settle quickly and quietly. She's in a much weaker position than she realizes. The weakness in Vanessa's position became apparent when Ryan came to see me the next day with an unexpected proposal. "Vanessa wants to negotiate." The meeting took place in Patricia's conference room on a gray Thursday morning that felt heavy with the weight of 3 years of accumulated resentment. Vanessa arrived with a new lawyer, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. I hadn't seen my daughter-in-law since the Christmas party, and the change in her appearance was startling. The confident, perfectly put-together woman I'd known had been replaced by someone who looked desperate and cornered. Her usual immaculate styling had given way to a more subdued look, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Mrs. Wright," her lawyer began nervously, "my client would like to find a resolution to this dispute that serves everyone's best interests." Patricia smiled coldly. "I'm listening." What followed was exactly what I'd expected. Vanessa was willing to apologize for her behavior and agree to family counseling in exchange for us dropping the lawsuit and agreeing never to discuss her conduct publicly again. "That's not going to work," Patricia said before I could respond. "Mrs. Wright has been the victim of systematic abuse and manipulation for 3 years. A simple apology doesn't address the damage that's been done or ensure it won't happen again." Vanessa spoke for the first time since entering the room. "What do you want from me? I've already lost half my friends because of your little performance at Christmas. My reputation is ruined. My marriage is falling apart. And now you're trying to take my children away from me." I looked at this woman who'd made my life miserable for 3 years and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. She genuinely seemed to believe she was the victim in this situation. "Vanessa, I want you to understand that your behavior has consequences. I want you to acknowledge the harm you've caused and take responsibility for changing it. And I want legal protections to ensure you never have the power to abuse me or manipulate my family again." "What kind of legal protections?" Her voice was tight, controlled. Patricia opened a folder and slid a document across the table. A binding agreement that specifies exactly how family interactions will proceed going forward. Supervised visitation with the grandchildren initially, mandatory counseling, and financial transparency to prevent future manipulation. Vanessa's lawyer reviewed the document and whispered urgently in her ear. I could see the moment when she realized how thoroughly her position had been compromised. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "You can't dictate how I interact with my own family." "Actually, we can," Patricia replied smoothly, "because the alternative is proceeding with the lawsuit, which will make all of the evidence we've gathered part of the public record. Given your history in Colorado and the pattern of manipulation we've documented, I suspect that won't end well for you." That's when Vanessa made the mistake that revealed just how desperate she'd become. She stood up suddenly, her chair rolling backward into the wall. "You think you're so smart, you old witch, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. I've destroyed better people than you, and I know things about your precious Thomas that would make you sick if you knew the truth." The room went silent. Even her own lawyer looked horrified at the outburst. "What are you talking about?" Ryan asked quietly. Vanessa's eyes glittered with malice. "Your father wasn't the saint you all think he was. He had secrets, dark ones, and I've known about them since before we got married. Why do you think he was so willing to document my behavior? He was protecting himself. Not you. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What secrets? The money, Eleanor. All that money you just inherited. It didn't come from his business success like you think. Your husband was involved in something that would have destroyed your family if it had come out. Patricia leaned forward slightly. Ms. Jackson Wright, I strongly advise you not to continue this line of, "Shut up," Vanessa snapped. She wants the truth, fine. Thomas Wright was laundering money for organized crime figures. That business he was so proud of, it was a front. Every dollar you just inherited is dirty money from drugs and illegal gambling operations. The silence that followed Vanessa's revelation stretched until it became uncomfortable. Then I began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, but grew into full-bodied laughter that made everyone in the room stare at me like I'd lost my mind. Vanessa's expression shifted from triumph to confusion as I laughed harder than I had in years. "Oh, Vanessa," I finally managed to say, wiping tears from my eyes. "You really have no idea how thoroughly you've been outplayed. Do you?" I opened my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope that Patricia had given me that morning. "Ryan, sweetheart, there's something about your father I haven't told you yet. Something I learned just last week that changes everything we thought we knew about this situation." I slid the envelope across to my son, who opened it with trembling hands. Inside were FBI documents, surveillance reports, and official commendations dating back 20 years. Your father wasn't laundering money for criminals. Vanessa, he was working with federal agents to catch people who were, for over 2 decades. Thomas Wright was an undercover consultant helping the FBI track financial crimes and money laundering operations. Ryan stared at the documents in shock. Dad was working for the FBI. He was recruited in 2001 when his accounting firm accidentally uncovered a money laundering scheme. Instead of just reporting it, he volunteered to help catch the people involved. He spent over 20 years helping federal agents build cases against organized crime figures. Vanessa's face had gone ashen. "That's impossible. The money we inherited isn't dirty. Vanessa? It's reward money and consultant fees from helping the government recover millions of dollars in criminal assets. Every penny is not only legal, but represents your father's service to his country." Patricia smiled as she pulled out another document. "Which brings us to the real reason for today's meeting. You see, when Ms. Jackson Wright made those accusations about Thomas Wright, she revealed knowledge of criminal activities that she couldn't possibly have known about unless she was involved herself." Vanessa's lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear, but she was staring at me with the expression of someone watching their world collapse. "The FBI has been investigating the Colorado money laundering case that Vanessa was involved in 3 years ago. They've been building a case against a network of people who target elderly individuals for financial manipulation. Vanessa's name has been on their radar for quite some time." I looked at my daughter-in-law with something approaching satisfaction. "When you threatened to expose Thomas's criminal activities, you revealed that you know details about money laundering operations that only someone involved in criminal financial manipulation would know. You essentially confessed to federal crimes while trying to threaten me." "I never said I was involved in anything," Vanessa protested, her voice rising. "You knew specific details about money laundering techniques and referenced criminal organizations that haven't been made public. The only way you could know those details is if you've been part of similar operations yourself." Patricia opened her laptop and turned it toward Vanessa. "We've been recording this meeting, and everything you've said is being reviewed by federal agents as we speak. The patterns of elder abuse, the financial manipulation, the systematic targeting of vulnerable individuals, it all fits the profile they've been developing." Vanessa's lawyer stood up abruptly. "This meeting is over. My client won't be saying another word without a federal defender present. But the damage was done. In trying to destroy me with lies about Thomas, Vanessa had revealed her own involvement in the exact type of criminal enterprise my husband had spent decades fighting against." As they rushed out of the conference room, Ryan sat staring at the FBI documents with tears in his eyes. "Mom, Dad was a hero. He was. And his final case was protecting his family from someone he'd recognized as a predator long before the rest of us saw the truth." The aftermath of that meeting unfolded more gradually than I expected. The federal investigation into Vanessa's activities was complex and moved at its own pace. While we waited for those wheels of justice to turn, we had to deal with the more immediate family fallout. Ryan filed for separation and temporary custody of the children. Vanessa fought it, of course, but the evidence of her deception and manipulation was overwhelming. The judge granted Ryan primary custody with Vanessa allowed supervised visitation twice a week. I was there when Ryan told the children not everything, of course, but enough to help them understand why their mother wouldn't be living with them for a while. "Is Grandma Eleanor going to be staying with us more?" asked 8-year-old Emily, her eyes wide and worried. "Would you like that?" Ryan asked. Emily nodded. "You make the best pancakes," she told me solemnly. "And you don't get mad when I ask questions." 6-year-old James was less understanding. "I want Mommy," he cried, burying his face in Ryan's shoulder. It broke my heart to see his confusion. And in that moment, I questioned whether exposing Vanessa had been worth the pain it caused these innocent children. But then I remembered what Thomas had written in his letter to me. The hardest truth is better than the kindest lie, especially when it comes to protecting those we love. The children deserved a childhood free from manipulation and conditional love. They deserved to know that their worth wasn't tied to their usefulness. In the weeks that followed, I spent more time with my grandchildren, rediscovering the simple joys of building blanket forts and reading stories. Without Vanessa's constant criticism and interference, the children seemed to relax, showing sides of their personalities I'd rarely seen before. "Grandma, did you know frogs can breathe through their skin?" James asked one afternoon as we walked through the park. "Mom said I shouldn't talk about gross stuff like that, but Dad says it's science." "Science is never gross," I told him. "It's just fascinating." "What else do you know about frogs?" He launched into an enthusiastic explanation of amphibian respiration, his face lit with the joy of sharing knowledge without fear of judgment. I realized how much Vanessa had stifled these children in her quest for perfect, well-behaved accessories to her social image. The federal investigation progressed slowly. Vanessa was questioned multiple times, and evidence was gathered from her various financial dealings. She maintained her innocence publicly, portraying herself as the victim of a vindictive mother-in-law's campaign to destroy her family. Some people believed her. I received angry messages from a few of her supporters, calling me selfish and cruel for tearing apart a perfect family. But others reached out with their own stories of Vanessa's manipulation and deceit, reinforcing the pattern Thomas had documented. 4 months after our confrontation in Patricia's office, federal prosecutors filed charges against Vanessa and 3 associates for a pattern of elder financial exploitation and money laundering across multiple states. The evidence was substantial, including financial records, witness testimonies, and Vanessa's own incriminating statements. The case made headlines, not just locally but nationally. "Socialite charged in elder exploitation ring," read one newspaper. "The perfect predator, how a Colorado woman targeted the elderly," read another. Overnight, Vanessa went from respected community member to suspected criminal. Ryan was devastated, despite everything he'd learned about his wife's deception. Part of him had still hoped there might be some explanation, some misunderstanding. Now he had to face the reality that the woman he'd loved and trusted had been living a double life throughout their marriage. "How did I not see it?" he asked me one evening as we sat on my porch, watching the children play in the yard. "How could I have been so blind?" "Because she was very good at what she did," I said gently. "And because you're a trusting person who sees the best in others. That's not a flaw. Ryan, it's a quality your father and I always admired in you." He shook his head. "Dad saw through her. Your father spent 20 years working with federal agents to identify financial criminals. He was trained to spot deception, and even he struggled with how to handle what he discovered about Vanessa." Ryan was silent for a long moment, watching his children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "How do we move forward from this?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. The trust Thomas had left me provided financial security, but money couldn't heal the emotional wounds Vanessa had inflicted on our family. It couldn't erase the children's confusion or Ryan's sense of betrayal. "One day at a time," I said. "We focus on the children, on building something honest and healthy for them. And we remember that your father's legacy wasn't just about exposing Vanessa, It was about protecting the family he loved. Vanessa's trial was scheduled for October, nearly a year after the Christmas party that had started it all. But in July, she accepted a plea deal, admitting to lesser charges in exchange for her testimony against the larger network of financial predators she'd worked with. The terms included restitution to her victims, 3 years of house arrest, and permanent restrictions on her access to financial positions of trust. She would avoid prison time, but would carry a felony record for the rest of her life. Ryan filed for divorce the day after her plea was finalized. The proceedings were relatively straightforward given the circumstances, but emotionally complex. The children struggled to understand why they couldn't see their mother more often, and Ryan wrestled with guilt over his role in bringing Vanessa into their lives. For me, the resolution was bittersweet. I'd achieved what Thomas had hoped for: freedom from Vanessa's manipulation and the protection of our family from her schemes. But the victory came with costs I hadn't anticipated. Some friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the public scandal. Neighbors whispered when I walked by. The children's school called with concerns about their emotional stability as they processed the changes in their family. And despite the evidence of her crimes, part of me still questioned whether I could have handled things differently. Could I have found a way to protect myself and my family without such a public and painful confrontation? Would Thomas have approved of how I'd implemented his carefully designed plan? 6 months after Vanessa's plea deal, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Martin, Thomas's oncologist, had seen the news coverage and reached out to share something he thought I should know. Thomas struggled with the ethical implications of what he was doing. Dr. Martin told me over coffee in my kitchen. He worried about the impact on Ryan, on the grandchildren. He asked me once if it was selfish of him to plan for a confrontation he wouldn't live to see. "What did you tell him?" I asked. I said that protecting his family from someone he knew to be dangerous wasn't selfish. It was the last act of love from a dying man. But I also reminded him that you were stronger than either of you realized, that when the time came, you would find your own way to use the tools he left you. "I hope I did the right thing," I said softly. "Doctor," Martin smiled. "I think Thomas would be proud of how you handled an impossible situation, not because you followed his plan exactly, but because you found your voice and used it to protect the people you love." His words stayed with me in the months that followed. As the immediate drama faded, our family began the slow work of healing and rebuilding. Ryan and the children moved into a smaller house, more modest than the showcase home he'd shared with Vanessa, but warmer somehow, filled with laughter and honest conversation. I visited several times a week, teaching Emily to bake and listening to James's endless facts about reptiles and amphibians. I used part of Thomas's trust to establish a small foundation that helps elderly people recognize and report financial abuse. We train families to spot manipulation tactics and provide legal support for people fighting predators like Vanessa. Sometimes I share my own story, hoping that others might recognize the warning signs I missed for so long. The foundation has grown steadily, partnering with senior centers and law enforcement agencies across the state. Last month, we helped an 82-year-old widower recover funds from a caregiver who had been systematically emptying his accounts. When he thanked me, tears in his eyes, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing since Thomas died. Ryan has become an advocate too, speaking at our workshops about how to recognize when a loved one is being isolated or manipulated. His honesty about his own blindness to Vanessa's behavior has helped many families recognize patterns in their own relationships. The children are resilient in the way that only children can be. They visit Vanessa monthly, supervised by a court-appointed guardian. These visits are often difficult, as Vanessa still struggles to understand the damage her behavior caused. But Ryan insists that they maintain a relationship with their mother, believing that they need to know all parts of their story, even the painful ones. As for me, I've rediscovered pieces of myself that had been submerged during those years of manipulation. I joined a community theater group, something Thomas had always encouraged. Last spring, I played the lead in their production of Arsenic and Old Lace, drawing on my own experiences to bring a surprising edge to the role of a seemingly harmless elderly woman. I've started dating recently, tentatively, awkwardly, at the persistent urging of my theater friends. Nothing serious, just coffee with a retired English professor who makes me laugh with bad puns and doesn't mind when I talk about Thomas. It's strange to feel those butterflies again at 66, to rediscover that I am not just a widow, not just a mother and grandmother, but still Eleanor, a woman with desires and dreams of her own. Sometimes I think about that Christmas party and how a moment of public humiliation became the first step in uncovering a federal crime. Thomas would have appreciated the irony that his final undercover operation involved using his own wife as bait to catch a criminal who thought she was too old and too naive to fight back. But I learned something that night that serves me well in my new role as an advocate for elder rights. Never underestimate an angry grandmother with nothing left to lose and a lifetime of experience in recognizing people who mistake kindness for weakness. The truth really did set us all free. And sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to stay silent when someone assumes you're too powerless to fight back. I still wear Thomas's ring on my left hand, still talk to him sometimes when I'm alone. But now those conversations are filled with gratitude rather than grief, with plans for the future rather than regrets about the past. You always knew I'd find my way back to myself. I tell him on those quiet evenings. And somehow, I know he's smiling.